Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man! Order! Statement. The Prime Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on our future economic partnership with the European Union. In December, we agreed the key elements of our departure from the EU, and we are turning that agreement into draft legal text. We have made clear our concerns about the first draft the Commission published last week, but no one should doubt our commitment to the entirety of the joint report. We are close to agreement on the terms of a time-limited implementation period to give governments, businesses and citizens on both sides time to prepare for our new relationship, and I am confident we can resolve our remaining differences in the days ahead. Now we must focus on our future relationship. A new relationship that respects the result of the referendum, provides an enduring solution, protects people's jobs and security, is consistent with the kind of country we want to be, and strengthens our union of nations and people. These are the 5 tests for the deal we will negotiate. There are also some hard facts for both sides. First, we are leaving the single market. In certain ways, our access to each other's markets will be less than it is now. We need to strike a new balance. But we will not accept the rights of Canada and the obligations of Norway. Second, even after we have left, EU law and ECJ decisions will continue to affect us. The ECJ determines whether agreements the EU has struck are legal under the EU's own law. And if, as part of our future partnership, Parliament passes an identical law to an EU law, it may make sense for our courts to look at the appropriate ECJ judgments so that we both interpret those laws consistently. As they do for the appropriate jurisprudence of other countries' courts. But the agreement we reach must respect the sovereignty of both our legal orders. That means the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the United Kingdom will end. It also means that the ultimate arbiter of disputes about our future partnership cannot be the court of either party. Third, if we want good access to each other's markets, it has to be on fair terms. As with any trade agreement, we must accept the need for binding commitments. So we may choose to commit some areas of our regulations, like state aid and competition, to remaining in step with the EU's. Finally, we must resolve the tensions between some of our objectives. We want the freedom to negotiate trade agreements around the world. We want control of our laws. We also want as frictionless a border as possible with the EU, so that we don't damage the integrated supply chains our industries depend on and don't have.
Order! There's a very considerable level of orchestrated heckling taking place in the House. Order! Including by some people who doubtless later will grin at me and seek to catch my eye. They may find that there is a clash between the two. We should set a good example which will impress our dear and loyal Canadian friends, and indeed, for that matter, the British people. The House can rest assured I will allow the maximum possible questioning and scrutiny on this occasion, as I always do. But the Prime Minister is entitled to be heard with courtesy. The Prime Minister.
The Commission, there are tensions in the EU's position and some hard facts for them. The Commission has suggested that an off-the-shelf model is the only option available to the UK. But they have also said that in certain areas, none of the EU's third country agreements would be appropriate. And the agreement envisaged in the European Council's own guidelines would not be delivered by a Canada-style deal. Finally, we need to face the fact that this is a negotiation and neither side can have exactly what we want. But I am confident we can reach agreement. So I am proposing the broadest and deepest possible future economic partnership, covering more sectors and cooperating more fully than any previous free trade agreement. And there are 5 foundations that must underpin our trading relationship. First, reciprocal binding commitments to ensure fair and open competition, so that UK business can compete fairly in EU markets and vice versa. Second, an independent arbitration mechanism. Third, an ongoing dialogue with the EU, including between regulators. Fourth, an arrangement for data protection that goes beyond an adequacy agreement. And fifth, free movement will come to an end. But UK and EU citizens will still want to work and study in each other's countries, and we're open to discussions about how to maintain the links between our people. We then need to tailor this partnership to the needs of our economies. And we should be absolutely clear that this is not cherry-picking. Wait for it. Every free trade agreement has varying market access depending on the respective interests of the countries involved. So if this is cherry-picking, then so is every trade arrangement. What matters is that our rights and obligations are held in balance. On goods, a fundamental principle in our negotiating strategy is that trade at the UK-EU border is as frictionless as possible, with no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. This means no tariffs or quotas, and ensuring that products only need to undergo one series of approvals in one country. To achieve this, we will need a comprehensive system of mutual recognition. This can be delivered through a commitment to ensure that the relevant UK regulatory standards remain as high as the EU's, which in practice means that UK and EU regulatory standards will remain substantially similar in future. Our default is that UK law may not necessarily be identical to EU law, but it should achieve the same outcomes. In some cases, Parliament might choose to pass an identical law. If the Parliament of the day decided not to achieve the same outcomes as EU law, it would be in the knowledge that there may be consequences for our market access. And we will need an independent mechanism to oversee these arrangements, which I have been clear cannot be the European Court of Justice. We also want to explore the terms on which the UK could remain part of EU agencies, such as those critical to the chemicals, medicines and aerospace industries. This would mean abiding by the rules of those agencies and making an appropriate financial contribution, and the UK would also have to respect the remit of the ECJ in that regard. Parliament could decide not to accept these rules, but with consequences for our membership and linked market access rights. Lastly, to achieve as frictionless a border as possible and to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, we also need an agreement on customs. The UK has been clear it is leaving the customs union. The EU has also formed a customs union with some other countries. But those arrangements, if applied to the UK, would mean the EU setting the UK's external tariffs, being able to let other countries sell more into the UK without making it any easier for us to sell more to them, or it would mean the UK signing up to the common commercial policy. That would not be compatible with a meaningful independent trade policy. And it would mean we had less control than we do now over our trade in the world. So we've set out 2 potential options for our customs arrangement: a customs partnership where at the border the UK would mirror the EU's requirements for imports from the rest of the world for those goods arriving in the UK and intended for the EU, or a highly streamlined customs arrangement where we would jointly implement a range of measures to minimise frictions, together with specific provisions for Northern Ireland. Both would leave the UK free to determine its own tariffs, which would not be possible in a customs union. Mr. Speaker, taken together, the approach we have set out on goods and agencies and the options for a customs arrangement provide the basis for a good solution to the very specific challenges for Northern Ireland and Ireland. And my commitment to this could not be stronger. We will not go back to a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. Neither will we break up the United Kingdom's own common market with a border down the Irish Sea. As Prime Minister, I am not going to let our departure from the EU do anything to set back the historic progress made in Northern Ireland, nor will I allow anything that would damage the integrity of our precious union. And the UK and Irish governments and the European Commission will be working together to ensure we fulfil these commitments. This approach to trade in goods is important for agriculture, food and drinks, but here other considerations apply. We are leaving the Common Agricultural Policy and the Common Fisheries Policy, and will want to take the opportunity to reform our agriculture and fisheries management and regain control of access to our waters. I fully expect that our standards will remain at least as high as the EU's, but it will be particularly important to secure flexibility here to make the most of our withdrawal from the EU for our farmers and exporters. We will also want to continue to work together to manage shared stocks in a sustainable way and agree reciprocal access to waters and a fairer allocation of fishing opportunities for the UK fishing industry. On services, we have the opportunity to break new ground with a broader agreement than ever before. For example, broadcasting and financial services have never previously been meaningfully covered in a free trade agreement. We recognise we cannot have the rights of membership of the single market, such as the country of origin principle or passporting, but we should explore creative options, including mutual recognition to allow broadcasting across borders. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will set out more detail on financial services later this week. We will also look to agree an appropriate labour mobility framework that enables travel to provide services in person, as well as continued mutual recognition of professional qualifications. Finally, our partnership will need to cover agreements in other areas, including energy, transport, digital, civil judicial cooperation, a far-reaching science and innovation pact, and cultural and educational programmes. Mr. Speaker, we cannot escape the complexity of the task ahead. We must build a new and lasting relationship while preparing for every scenario. But with pragmatism, calm and patient discussion, I am confident we can set an example to the world. Yes, there will be ups and downs over the months ahead, but we will not be buffeted by the demands to talk tough or threaten a walkout, and we will not give in to the counsels of despair that this simply cannot be done. For this is in both the UK and EU's interests. And as we go forwards, foremost in my mind is the pledge I made on my first day as Prime Minister, to act not in the interests of the privileged few, but in the interests of all our people. To make Britain a country that works for everyone. And Mr. Speaker, my message to our friends in Europe is clear. You asked us to set out what we want in more detail. We have done that. We have shown we understand your principles. We have a shared interest in getting this right. So let's get on with it, and I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the Prime Minister for the advanced copy of this statement. 20 months have passed since the referendum. A year has passed since the triggering of Article 50. 20 wasted months in which the arrogance of some of the Cabinet, who said it would be the easiest deal in history, has turned into debilitating infighting. We've seen set-piece speech after set-piece speech, yet the Prime Minister still cannot bring clarity to these negotiations and still cannot bring certainty to British businesses or workers. The Prime Minister's speech on Friday promised to unite the nation, yet it barely papered over the cracks in her own party. Even her own Minister for the Cabinet Office said it was only an ambitious opening bid. So who knows where we will end up? The European Union published a detailed legal document last Wednesday, and despite the criticisms rightly made from across this House, where is anything comparable in terms of detail and focus from the UK government? The reality is this speech failed to deliver any clear and credible solution to the problems we face. This government's shambolic approach to Brexit risks taking us down a dangerous road. This government's reckless strategy is putting our jobs and manufacturing industries at risk. The Prime Minister's only clear priority seemed to be to tie the UK permanently to EU rules which have been used to enforce privatisation and block support for industry. The Prime Minister now seems to be saying we will lose some access to European markets and Britain will be worse off. So,
Order. I said that the Prime Minister must not be subjected to orchestrated heckling and an attempt to shout down. The same goes for the Leader of the Opposition. And let me give notice now to some of the people shouting loudly. If you want to persist in that behaviour, don't then be surprised if you do not catch my eye in the questionings. If you want to be called, behave. If you wish to persist with misbehaviour, frankly, you might as well leave the chamber now. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, does the Prime Minister now agree that the Brexit Secretary was wrong when he told the House of Commons in January last year that a Tory Brexit deal will deliver the exact same benefits of the single market and customs union? And if so, why has it taken us so long to say so? In her speech, the Prime Minister said she wanted good access. Can she today be clear whether this means tariff-free access? The Prime Minister said she wanted a customs arrangement, but does this cover all sectors of industry or just some? And which will be excluded with what consequences in terms of tariffs and other barriers? Does the Prime Minister still think a good trade deal can easily be reached with the Trump presidency after their unilateral imposition of tariffs on steel and aluminium imports, which follows their disgraceful attack on Bombardier? Mr. Speaker, it is possible to retain the benefits of the single market and customs union. The problem is we have a cabinet, Prime Minister being held hostage by the extremes in that cabinet, who are willing to sacrifice parts of British business and industry, willing to risk a hard border in Northern Ireland in order to carry on with their ideological crusade to shrink the state, slash investment and bring about an economic race to the bottom. The Prime Minister said in her speech that in areas like workers' rights or the environment, and I quote, "we will not engage in a race to the bottom on standards and protections," saying there is no political constituency in the UK which would support this. Mr. Speaker, this simply isn't true. In the recent past, we've seen the Secretary of State for International Trade say it is intellectually unsustainable to believe that workplace rights should remain untouchable. The Leader of the House has said that for small business, I envisage there being no regulation whatsoever, no minimum wage, no maternity or paternity rights, no dismissal rights, and no pension rights. And the Foreign Secretary described EU-derived employment legislation as backbreaking, and in their leaked assessments, the Brexit Department's exit analysis states that there could be opportunities for the UK in deregulating in areas such as the environment and employment law. So, Mr. Speaker, there clearly is a political constituency that supports a race to the bottom on workplace rights. It's called the Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, on the crucial issue of Northern Ireland, the Prime Minister offered no real solution. Instead, she rehashed an already discredited government idea to use a mix of technology and goodwill to ensure no hard border. an idea that the Brexit Secretary already conceded was mere blue sky thinking. Doesn't the Prime Minister understand this isn't just about cross-border paperwork and trade? There is also an issue of maintaining the social peace that has endured for 20 years. Will she condemn the ridiculous remarks of the Foreign Secretary last week, when he not only compared the Irish border to that of Camden and Islington, but also wrote her a letter saying it was not the British government's responsibility to prevent a hard border? Mr. Speaker, there are some things we do welcome in the Prime Minister's speech. I knew you'd be pleased. For one, it's clear she's now abandoned her ridiculous red line regarding any role for the European Court of Justice, which opens the door to the Prime Minister's welcome adoption of Labour's position for the UK to remain a key part of the European Union agencies which are of benefit to this country. Mr. Speaker, as I set out last week, Labour's priority is to get the best Brexit deal for jobs and living standards, to underpin our plans to upgrade the economy and invest in every region and in every community in this country. The Conservative government's reckless austerity is damaging our country. And the increasing sense of drift over Brexit risks increasing that damage. Now, the Prime Minister admits her Brexit plan will reduce our access to European markets and leave people worse off. Mr. Speaker, we've had 20 months of promises, soundbites and confusions. However, people feel about Brexit, and it's clear to them that this government is nowhere near delivering a good deal for Britain.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition raised a number of issues there. First of all, he raised the issue of steel tariffs and the position of the United States of America. I spoke to President Trump about this yesterday, but can I just say to the right honourable gentleman that we're much more likely to get a positive result by engaging with the United States of America rather than by standing on the sidelines shouting at them, as he always does. He talks about workers' rights and other standards. We've been very clear, this is the government that is not just maintaining workers' rights, we're enhancing workers' rights. And we are committed to maintaining high environmental standards. He asked me whether we wanted a deal that was tariff-free. Actually, if he'd listened, well, I gave him, as he said, the statement in advance. So he read it there. I actually referred to tariff-free access in the statement that I made. He talks about ideological crusades. I have to say, the only person in this House who's, well, not the only person, because there's a Shadow Chancellor as well who's on an ideological crusade. There is a fundamental flaw at the heart of what the right honourable gentleman has chosen as his approach towards the European Union and the relationship post-Brexit. He talks about free trade agreements with the European Union, and yet at its heart he is clear that he would go against one of the key elements of ensuring that we could have such trade deals, notably the issue around state aid, because he would want to tear up rules on state aid and fair competition, because he doesn't believe in fair competition, and that is perfectly clear. He also, right at the very beginning of his remarks, he asked about the withdrawal agreement, the draft legal text on the withdrawal agreement that was published by the European Union last week, and he referred to my speech as if my speech last Friday was about the same thing. I have to tell him, no, it wasn't, actually. So can I just explain? There are three issues and three elements of the process at the moment. We're negotiating the final arrangements for the implementation period, which we hope will be agreed in March, and certainly intend will be agreed in March. Alongside that, we're looking at the legal text of withdrawal agreement, which Michel Barnier has made clear on his timetable we were looking for October. And now we want to start the negotiations on the future economic partnership and the future security partnership. He talks about the European Court of Justice. The jurisdiction of the court in the United Kingdom will end. We will bring back control of our laws to this Parliament, to this country. unlike the Labour Party's position, which is to remain in the single market and effectively to remain under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. We will also take control of our borders, unlike the Labour Party's position, when asked, well, they don't seem to know what their position is, because they've both said, the leader of the opposition said that the Labour Party would be bringing a free movement to an end, whereas at the same time one of his colleagues, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, said that, the shadow Brexit secretary, said easy movement would continue in relation to this. And we know they won't bring back control. They know we won't bring back control. They wouldn't bring back control of money, because they've said basically they would pay whatever it takes to the European Union regardless. And then he talks about focus, then he talks about delays. This is a government that is focusing on making a success of Brexit, on delivering for the British people. But Labour have nothing to offer. They voted against Brexit, moving the negotiations on in the European Parliament. They twice voted against the bill that delivers Brexit in this Parliament. Now they've gone back on what they promised over the customs union. And over a week ago, the Shadow Chancellor said Labour would keep all options open on whether or not to have a second referendum. This government and this party is clear. There will be no second referendum. We're delivering for the British people, and we're going to make a success of it.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend on what I thought was an excellent speech, clear and determined, and giving the European Union a very clear sense of direction. Can I also say that in the speech, I thought perhaps the most important point, the point voted on in the referendum, was to take back control. Would you not agree with me, therefore, bringing these decisions back to a British Parliament in future to make all decisions about our arrangements is exactly about delivering on that? And when she gets into negotiations with her European counterparts about trade arrangements, could she remind them that cake exists to be eaten and cherries exist to be picked?
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and can I say to him, he is absolutely right. When people voted in the referendum to leave the European Union, they voted to take back control of our borders, our money and our laws. And what we're very absolutely clear is that when we have left the European Union, decisions over our laws, decisions over our standards will be for this Parliament to take. We will take back control.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for early sight of her statement. Mr. Speaker, it is now over 18 months since the referendum. At a time when the United Kingdom should be finishing the touches to its negotiating position, this government is still struggling to find paper upon which to write down its wish list. It was nothing short of humiliation for this government last week when the EU presented a draft legal text for withdrawal. The Prime Minister gave a speech extolling empty rhetoric one more time. No single market and no customs union means there is no solution that would prevent a hard border in Ireland. The government's own analysis has revealed growth would be hit by up to 9% in such an extreme scenario. Scottish Government analysis revealed Scots could face a loss of £2,300 per person each year, with our GDP around £12.7 billion lower by 2030. That's the reality of the government's plans. Last month, as the Prime Minister gathered with her cabinet at Chequers, there was one glaring absence. Where was the Secretary of State for Scotland? Scotland's voice was not heard at these crucial cabinet discussions. There has, Mr. Speaker, been a flagrant disregard by this government of the nations that make up the United Kingdom. The Scottish Secretary might not have been invited to Chequers, but rest assured, members on these benches will be in this chamber speaking up for Scotland at every opportunity.
the very sizable number of Scottish Conservative members waving at the honourable gentleman. I think, Mr Ross, you're leading with your flag, of which you have very considerable experience. But, Mr Blackford, what I would say to you is, KBO, man, just keep going.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We will settle for nothing less than continued membership of the single market and customs union. Scotland voted to stay in the EU. We cannot, we will not be ripped out of the single market and customs union against our will. We will defend the jobs that the Prime Minister is prepared to trade away. We in Scotland must determine our own destiny. We are a European nation and we intend to stay one. Will the Prime Minister finally recognise that staying in the single market and the customs union is the least damaging outcome for jobs and prosperity?
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman that he talks about having Scottish nationalist MPs here in this House. I note there are only 9 here today, which of course is a smaller number than the number of Conservative Scottish members of Parliament. Can I also say to the right honourable gentleman that the decisions that led to the approach that was in my speech were taken by the whole Cabinet, not by a subgroup of the Cabinet, and all members, bar one who was in this House at the time, were present when that decision was taken. He talks about the timing. Well, I have to say to him that he appears, like the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, to have misunderstood that the European Union has very set out at the beginning that there will be different phases to this negotiation. The first phase, and I was always straight with this House that I believe citizens' rights should be in the first phase. They were. We agreed that in December. Many people, including possibly, I can't remember, but possibly the right honourable gentleman, was sceptical about whether we would get that deal. We did get that deal. Now we move on to the second phase of the negotiations. And finally, can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, he has yet again a tunnel vision on there only being one approach to be taken on a single market and a customs union. We will be ensuring that we get that tariff-free and as frictionless trade as possible with the European Union. We will be ensuring there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We will also enable this country to be able to run an independent trade policy, negotiating trade deals around the west of the world. And finally, the right honourable gentleman talks about Scotland as an independent nation taking decisions. Can I yet again remind him that from Scotland's economy's point of view, the most important thing is to be part of the United Kingdom, and it's the United Kingdom that will deliver.
John Redwood.
The Prime Minister speaks for the big majority of the British people when she says both sides now need to get on with it. Will she confirm that the British government will ensure we are ready to leave in March 2019 with or without a deal, with or without a positive response from the EU?
Well, I can reassure my right honourable friend we will be leaving in March 2019, and we continue to work on all scenarios to ensure we're ready.
Hilary Benn.
Much indeed, Mr Speaker. While the Prime Minister's speech provided some welcome additional detail on her view of the future partnership, the Irish Foreign Minister, Simon Coveney, said yesterday that she had not done so when it comes to maintaining a largely invisible border on the island of Ireland. Regardless of the means that she has in mind for achieving that, is she able today to give a guarantee to businesses in Northern Ireland and the Republic that their manufactured goods and their agricultural products will be able to cross that border without checks, controls or infrastructure when we leave the European Union?
The right honourable gentleman, can I welcome his opening remark where he said that I had provided more detail in the speech I gave on Friday. He might like to have a discussion with the Leader of the Opposition about the fact that there was that detail in the speech. In relation to the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, we will not return to a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We want that free flow of goods and services and people to be able to continue. Of course, we're committed to the common travel area, but we also want the free flow of goods and services and people between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And that is why we took the position we did on the proposal that came forward last week from the European Commission, which would have meant a border down the Irish Sea, which is unacceptable.
Alice Seabury.
much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no one can doubt the determination of our Prime Minister to get the very best deal for our country in these most difficult of negotiations. In her speech on Friday, she was frank about the complexity and the economic consequences of the deal that she seeks with the European Union. In the spirit of that frankness, it is undoubtedly the case that any deal will bear considerable administrative costs. Will the Prime Minister undertake to keep this House and therefore our constituents fully appraised of those administrative costs of our eventual relationship and deal with the European Union?
Well, yes. Can I say to my right honourable friend that we, as we've said before, we will, of course, when it is possible to do so, make information available to this House as we're going through this process of negotiation. A certain amount of information has already been made available, for example, on the amount of money that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, set aside for the contingency preparations that are being made by departments across government, and she'll be aware also of some of the other steps that we've taken, such as setting up 2 new departments when I became Prime Minister to ensure that we had a department focused on exiting the European Union and another department of international trade focused on making absolutely a success of the opportunities that will open to us once we've left the EU.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is still proposing that we should be outside the customs union and have different external tariffs and commercial policies, which you will know will mean burdensome rules of origin checks and customs checks on goods crossing borders to make sure that businesses don't evade or avoid those different external tariffs. She's proposed that in Ireland 80% of businesses would be exempt from any of those checks. But she will also be aware that security experts have warned not just of the risk from physical infrastructure at the border, but also from an increased incentive to smuggling, particularly given the links between smuggler groups and paramilitary organisations. So why is she continuing to pursue a policy on the customs union which has a risk of increasing both the smuggling and security threat?
First of all, can I remind the right honourable lady that the 80% reference came in one of the options on the customs arrangements for the future between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And, of course, what I set out in the speech in relation to that border issue was not just about the customs arrangements, but also about the regulatory standards that we would be following as a country once we've left the European Union. But can I just say this to her? We are not going to be in a customs union. We're not going to be in the customs union, because if we were, that would prevent us from being able to follow an independent trade policy. And that is something I believe we should be following, because we can see great opportunities for companies and businesses and jobs and prosperity in the UK as a result of that.
Sir William Cash.
And my right honourable friend's confirmation in both her speech on Friday and her statement today that her EU policy rightly rests on fundamental UK principles in our national interest, namely the sovereignty of our own Parliament and of our own judiciary, our own democracy and the integrity of the United Kingdom. Does she agree with me that the continuous unprincipled reversals by the official opposition of its policy betrays not only their own voters but the country as well?
Say to my humble friend, I think he's absolutely right, and we can consistently see the opposition saying one thing about their policy on Brexit one minute and something else the next. And crucially, they would not be delivering for the British people, because they would be staying in a single market, they would be staying in a customs union, they would see jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, they would continue to be paying sums of money over to the European Union, and those are the very things that people voted against.
Sir Vincent Cable.
Can I first congratulate the Prime Minister on the fact that after 20 months of tough negotiation, she appears now to have delivered at least a trade deal with her own cabinet. But specifically in her future independent trade negotiations with the economic nationalist and warmonger in the White House, what exactly are the Prime Minister's red lines, and do they include the NHS?
I'm absolutely clear that as we look to negotiate a trade deal with the United States of America, the National Health Service will remain as it is today. It will remain free at the points of use. The National Health Service is not for sale. We continue to stand by the principles of the NHS, and we're very clear about that when we come to negotiating a trade deal with the United States.
Ah, yes, a very well-behaved fellow, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that compliment. Does my right honourable friend, having made such a generous offer to the European Union, expect more generosity than they have shown so far? I think particularly of the aggression in the draft legal text of suggesting a solution to the Irish problem that would have been in contradiction of the supply and confidence agreement with the DUP and threatened the existence of the government. Does my right honourable friend think it's right for the European Commission to behave in such a high-handed fashion?
What I would say to my honourable friend is that we are in a negotiation. Both sides put their positions at various stages, but just as the European Commission chose to put that position forward, so it was absolutely right for this government to be clear, and I repeated it last week in Prime Minister's questions, and I'm happy to do so again, that the suggestion that there should be a border down the Irish Sea separating Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom is completely unacceptable to this government, and I believe to any government in the United Kingdom.
McFadden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday and today, the Prime Minister said that our access to one another's markets would be less than it is now. This is the public burial of the claim made by her Brexit Secretary a year ago in this House that the government's aim was to secure the exact same benefits as we now enjoy. The Prime Minister has admitted to the country that there is an economic cost to Brexit. So will she now tell us what is that economic cost? When will the public be told about it? And who will pay it?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, life is going to be different in the future because we will have a different relationship with the European Union. But while he and the Labour Party consistently only focus on our relationship with the European Union, what we're doing as a government is ensuring we get the good trade deal, the best possible trade deal with the European Union, together with trade deals with countries around the rest of the world, and develop our economy so it's a Britain fit for the future.
Dr. Sarah Wollaston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is rightly putting the needs of patients first in seeking associate membership of the European Medicines Agency. Will she go further in doing the same to commit to freedom of movement for researchers, health and care workforce, both now and in the future, who seek to work and study in each other's countries?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that when we leave the European Union, free movement, which has been one of the pillars of the EU, will end. But we will, as I said in my statement, as I said in my speech on Friday, EU citizens will continue to want to work and study here, and UK citizens will continue to want to work and study in the EU 27. And we will be setting out our proposals for our immigration rules on that, and we will stand ready to discuss the arrangements that will be made in future.
Emma Nicol-Pengelly.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for her robust rejection of the disgraceful European Union attempts to interfere in the internal constitutional affairs of our sovereign United Kingdom? And will the Prime Minister agree with me that in finding and pursuing the customs solutions outlined today, that there is nothing that could add in terms of additional barriers or additional requirements in relation to Northern Ireland trade and trade with Great Britain in the internal market of the United Kingdom?
As I'm very happy to make clear that what we are looking for is an arrangement which both maintains the internal market of the United Kingdom and ensures that we have no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We've set out proposals as to how we can achieve that, and I look forward to discussing those with the European Commission, but also with the Taoiseach and the Irish Government.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
Will the Prime Minister confirm that the Commission are now in full possession of all the issues upon which we are to negotiate, and thus that there is no good reason why these talks should not now proceed apace in an orderly and friendly fashion?
Absolutely. The European Union asked for more detail to be set out. I said I would do that at the appropriate time. I have now done that on both security and our economic partnership, and I say my message to the European Union in relation to the negotiations is let's get on with it.
Kate Hoey.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has made some very sensible suggestions in her speech about the relationship in the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Has she read the committee, the Constitutional Committee of the European Parliament, which has produced a very good report on how the border issue can be solved by innovative technology and so on? Will she make sure that her officials, before they go back into negotiations, also read that?
I can tell the Right Honourable Lady I'm aware of that report, and I have asked officials to look at it very carefully. I believe it does give some very good proposals for solutions.
David Duquette.
Speaker, can I welcome my right honourable friend's commitment yet again to leave the common fisheries policy and the common agricultural policy, a commitment that's very welcome in my constituency in Scotland. Might surprise some members opposite. What impact does she think this new freedom will have on those sectors?
I think that these freedoms that we will be able to have, and obviously we have to set our new agricultural policy and fisheries policy, but I believe they will open up new opportunities for fishermen and farmers across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Emma Reynolds.
Speaker, could the Prime Minister name an international border between two countries who are not in a customs union, who have different external tariffs, where there are no checks on lorries carrying goods at the border?
I have to say to the Honourable Lady, there are many examples of different arrangements for customs around the rest of the world, and indeed we are looking at those, including, for example, the border between the United States and Canada.
Mr. Bernard Jenkins.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for her statement and congratulate her on a speech, a calm speech, that has been widely welcomed, both based on the principles she has consistently set out towards leaving the European Union and on the realistic compromises this nation will have to make in order to achieve a comprehensive trade agreement. Don't we now owe it to her to get behind her and her negotiations instead of, like the other side of this House, undermining her all the time?
Can I say to thank my honourable friend and say to him that I think it would be a much stronger position if the opposition were actually to get behind the government and agree to support the approach that we are taking to get the best possible deal from Brexit. We're focused on delivering for the British people. Sadly, the opposition want to frustrate Brexit and fly in the face of the vote that was taken by the British people.
Ben Bradshaw.
Do President Trump's trade barriers aimed primarily at us in Europe and against Canada, and the news from this lunchtime that the Americans are offering us a worse deal on open skies than the one we currently enjoy as members of the European Union, ever make the Prime Minister think we might be making a mistake by removing ourselves from our single biggest market and the world's biggest free trade area?
That's right. That's right. Just say to the right honourable gentleman that I think it is very important. The British people voted for us to leave the European Union. If the right honourable gentleman is saying we should stay in the single market and stay in the customs union, what he is suggesting is that actually the trade policy for the United Kingdom will be determined by the European Union without us having a say in that, which would mean that they would be determining our external tariffs, they would be determining the basis on which we were trading with countries around the rest of the world, without any... And if he really thinks that the European Union in that circumstance will put the interests of the United Kingdom first, I have to tell him that I don't think it would, and it's better for us to have our own independent policy.
Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend clarify that, contrary to the comments made by the Leader of the Opposition, the establishment of an independent arbitration mechanism will mean that the ECJ will not have jurisdiction over our future relationship?
My honourable friend is absolutely right.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor of the Exchequer will soon give us the spring statement, and at that moment the OBR will publish their financial outlook for our country. So what instructions, in order to produce that forecast, has the Prime Minister given to the OBR? What has she informed them of her new policy for Brexit?
The OBR is an independent body. They determine their own forecasts, they make their own judgments about the future, and we look forward to seeing what they will be bringing forward at the time of the spring statement.
Stephen Crabb.
President Trump's threats over steel products remind us that alongside an independent trade policy we need independent and effective trade enforcement and trade defence measures. What assurance can the Prime Minister give the House that we will have those systems in place from day one when we leave the European Union?
Can I say to my right honourable friend that we are indeed working on ensuring that we have the what is necessary, the structures that are necessary in place. Of course, legislation will be brought forward to this House in due course in relation to those issues, and he's made reference to trade remedies. Of course, it's very important that we're able to determine those trade remedies rather than leaving it to the European Union to determine them for us, as would happen under the policy of the Leader of the Opposition.
Caroline Lucas.
Since the Brexit that she set out is nothing like the Brexit we were promised, no exact same benefits and far from £350 million a week for the NHS, we've got nurses actually leaving the NHS and fewer coming. Does she not think it would be right to give the people the right to have a say on the final deal?
I say to the Honourable Lady, we actually have more nurses working on wards in the NHS now than we did in 2010. The British people were given a vote on membership of the European Union by this Parliament, and we're delivering on their decision.
Michael Fabricant.
The Prime Minister has consistently said that she wants to have a unique Brexit trade deal for Britain, and said again today that Canada and Norway don't have the models for us. Is she aware that Angela Merkel has pointed out that Norway only has a population of 4 million and Canada a population of 36 million and trades with the United States? So is she as pleased as I am that Angela Merkel has been able to form a government? And does she agree that Angela Merkel, being the pragmatic lady she is, will have considerable influence on the European Union in securing a good deal for the United Kingdom?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I was pleased to speak to Chancellor Merkel yesterday to congratulate her on the formation of her government. I look forward to the negotiations we'll be having with Germany and the other members of the European Union. And she and others have all been clear that as we look to the future relationship, we recognise that actually models that already exist don't meet the requirements of the United Kingdom.
Chris Leslie.
The Prime Minister has been forced to admit that market access will be less. She wants to be straight with the public. This time last year, she promised that we would have the same benefits in terms of that access to free trade. Does she regret that?
We are setting out on negotiating a free trade deal which will ensure that in goods we continue to have the tariff-free and as frictionless as possible trade across borders. We have also set out our ambition for financial services, for digital services, broadcasting and a whole range of other areas. We will be achieving the benefits of the trade with the European Union, in some cases in different ways. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have the benefits of a good trading relationship with the European Union in future.
Maggie Throop.
I welcome my Right Honourable's pragmatic approach to negotiations with the EU and her ongoing commitment to getting the best deal for Britain. Would she agree with me that by fixing the roof and eliminating the day-to-day budget deficit, Britain is now in a much stronger position to be able to forge new trading relationships with the rest of the world as well as the EU and make a success of Brexit?
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important point, which is that, of course, it is the decisions that have been taken by Conservatives in government since 2010 that have put our economy in a much stronger position that enable us to be able to do those very good trade deals. And if we just look at what's happened recently, productivity is up, borrowing is down, employment is up. This is a strong economy, and we should have optimism about our future.
Diana Johnson.
Mr Speaker, Siemens are doing great work in East Yorkshire, in Hull with the renewables factory and at Goole with plans for a train factory. So can the Prime Minister just say to me whether she believes that there will be the same access to European markets for Siemens once we've left the EU in March 2019?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that I'm very pleased to welcome the investment and continued investment that Siemens is making in the United Kingdom, and I meet with the and I meet with senior directors of Siemens from time to time to discuss their investment in the United Kingdom. Can I also say that we have been clear, as I have said in my speech on Friday, we have been listening to businesses. That's one of the reasons why we have talked about maintaining high regulatory standards and goods crossing borders, so that we can maintain that good trade access between the United Kingdom and the European Union in the future.
George Freeman.
I congratulate my right honourable friend on a reassuringly and typically business-like speech on Friday, which sent a clear message that there will be no hard Brexit, only hard choices. Would she reassure me and the UK life science sector that her arrangement, her proposal for associate membership of the European Medicines Agency means we'll be able to sell medicines into Europe and continue to lead in the pioneering technologies of tomorrow's medicines?
I'm very clear about the important role that the life sciences industry plays in the United Kingdom, and I pay tribute to the work that my honourable friend has done in relation to the life sciences industry here in the United Kingdom. And we do wish to explore the possibility of some form of associate membership of these agencies. I think that's not just in the interest of the UK. I think it's in the interest of people across the EU in terms of getting medicines to market more quickly.
Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The European Union has published the draft text of its legal stance of its negotiating position. The Prime Minister makes a speech which does give more detail but is still full of ambiguity. When will she publish the legal text of her negotiating stance?
I did try to explain this to the Leader of the Opposition, but I'll have another go. The legal text that was published by the European Commission is not a legal text on their negotiations for the future economic or security partnership. It is a legal text on withdrawal agreement. It is, we're working on that with them, but what I have done is set out from the United Kingdom's point of view what we want to see from our future economic partnership, just as I set out our future security partnership in Munich a few weeks ago. We now wait for the response from the European Union to us putting out our proposals before they have put out theirs.
Mr. Peter Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 389 days' time, United Kingdom will leave the dreadful European Union superstate. The Prime Minister will end the free movement of people. She will stop sending billions and billions of pounds to the EU each and every year, and will make her own laws in her own country, judged by her own judges. Does the Prime Minister find it slightly disconcerting that she's the first Conservative leader that's been able to unite these benches on Europe?
I'm very pleased that these Conservative benches are united in the aim of ensuring that we deliver on the vote of the British people, we leave the European Union, and we do it with a good deal that leads to an optimistic future for this country.
Angela Smith.
Mr. Speaker, it's obvious that the Prime Minister sees a US trade deal as something of a priority, so will she guarantee that there will be no sacrifice of either the interests of UK farmers or of our animal welfare and environmental standards in order to secure such a deal?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that the United States has expressed interest in a trade deal with us, so have a number of other countries around the world, such as Australia and others. But we, as I have said, as the Environment Secretaries and others have said, we remain committed to high animal welfare and environmental standards.
Sir Desmond Sway.
Were a settlement close, how will she react to entreaties to delay departure by agreement within Article 50?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, it is our intention to ensure that we can negotiate what is necessary to negotiate within the timescale that is set within Article 50.
Mrs. Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I had an email from a senior businessman in the North East who says the Prime Minister and her Cabinet seem to ignore the real nature of global trade today. Our businesses wishing to trade with China or the USA build new facilities there. They don't send goods halfway around the globe. We want to share in existing EU arrangements.
Why doesn't the Prime Minister start listening to the CBI and the Chambers of Commerce?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that the CBI, the Chambers of Commerce, the FSB welcomed what I set out in my speech on Friday as an ambitious programme, but also welcomed the degree of detail that there was in my speech. We are listening to business. That's why I put what I did in my speech in relation to regulatory standards.
Oh, gosh. Paul Masterton.
Mr. Speaker, as a Conservative, it's always pleasing when pragmatism trumps ideology, but as a Unionist, it is vital that our departure from the EU does not undermine the political, constitutional or economic integrity of our Union. So can the Prime Minister confirm it's her position that there will never be any differentiated deal for any of the constituent part of the United Kingdom?
Well, I'm absolutely clear that we want to maintain the United Kingdom. This is a precious union of four nations but one people, and it is in the economic interests of all parts of the United Kingdom that we maintain that internal market of the United Kingdom. And we do not want to see, and we will not see, Brexit leading to any breakup of the United Kingdom.
Jenny Chapman.
Speaker, my friend, the member for Wolverhampton North East, asked earlier where an example could be found of a border between jurisdictions. And the Prime Minister gave the example of Canada and America as being a soft, frictionless border. Mr. Speaker, there are guns and armed customs guards on that border. Surely that's not what she has in mind. Can you perhaps find another example?
Right, what I said was that we are looking at the border arrangements in a number of countries around the world. We're looking not just at the border arrangements that the European Union has with a number of countries, and it has a variety of customs arrangements with various countries. We're also looking more widely around the world. But also, what I have set out is what I believe is a future arrangement for customs that will suit the United Kingdom and the European Union, that will ensure no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And as her right honourable friend, the member for Vauxhall, pointed out, this is something that has been picked up within the European Parliament, and it has been made clear that there are innovative solutions that can deliver exactly what we're talking about.
John Barron.
Commend the Prime Minister on her speech on Friday and her statement in the House today. With record inward investment, record manufacturing output, record low unemployment for a generation, when does she think economic reality is going to dawn on those doomsters opposite, particularly when it comes to the economic prize that will be available once we've left the EU?
Well, I have to say to my honourable friend, of course, unfortunately, the opposition are just turning their face away from what is actually happening in our economy. From the great, as I said, productivity up, employment up, borrowing down. We are seeing good results here in our economy, but there is more that we can be doing. And I'm optimistic about what we can achieve with our trade arrangements with the EU in the future, but also as we go outside and become a much more outward-looking country with an independent trade policy.
Joanna Cherry.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has said that last week's speech was not about the draft withdrawal agreement produced by the EU, and I understand that. But she has suggested, in answer to a number of questions from honourable members today, that that draft withdrawal agreement does not accurately reflect what she agreed to in December. If that's the case, when is she going to produce an alternative draft which she says does accurately reflect what she agreed to in December?
The Honourable Lady, what I have said about that draft withdrawal agreement is that the European Commission chose to put in it, I mean it's a lengthy document, they chose to put in it a particular reference to the issue of the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. That was the third option in the December joint report. I and the Taoiseach are both very clear that we want to resolve this issue by the first option that was in the report, notably the UK's overall relationship with the European Union. There are ways in which all three options can be produced, which can be developed, including that third option, which is different from that produced by the European Commission. And that produced by the European Commission could not be accepted by UK government.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Competition policy is the glue that holds together all free trade agreements. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the suggestion from the party opposite that they could somehow remain in the single market whilst running reckless through state aid policy is a fantasy fiction drama worthy of an Oscar?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. She's hit the nail on the head.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My next-door neighbour from Chingford and Woodford Green may tell the Prime Minister that cherries are there to be picked and cake is there to be eaten, but however sweet it seems, fudge is no way to run a country. So can she tell us straight? There are £400 million worth of public contracts that have full or partial EU funding and are due to expire in the next 4 months. Does she intend to renew or replace these, many of which are with education and skills facilities, or does she need to find a bus to write it on first?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that obviously while we are still members of the European Union, we are looking at maintaining our relationships within the EU and maintaining our obligations and rights as a member of the European Union. Of course we look, and one of the issues that will be looked at in relation to the withdrawal agreement is what happens to contracts that are in place at the point at which we leave, and what arrangements those contracts will be, what arrangements will pertain to those contracts.
Richard Graham.
I welcome the balance and realism in the Prime Minister's speech to allay the concerns of those who continually argued that the only deal available to us would be a clone of previous deals with other countries. Would my right honourable friend confirm today that both her government and the European Commission's preparations show clearly that the deal reached with us will be unique, bespoke, multi-tiered, and confirm the continuing existence of many areas of cooperation between our two areas while respecting the result that the referendum requires?
Yes, can I say to my honourable friend, he's absolutely right. This is a relationship that we will be building across a number of areas. I've spoken specifically about economic partnership and in most detail about the goods trade between the EU and the UK in the future. There is a security partnership as well, our work on civil judicial cooperation, a whole range of areas in which we will be building a new relationship, but a continuing good relationship with the European Union, because we may be leaving the EU, but we're not leaving Europe.
Stephen Timms.
Mr. Speaker, the reality, unfortunately, is that the hard Brexit that the Prime Minister is now pursuing will lead inexorably and inevitably to a hard border in Northern Ireland. Between Canada and the United States, there are border checks of exactly the kind she rightly says, unlike the Foreign Secretary, she doesn't want in Northern Ireland. So will she confirm she cannot name a single example anywhere in the world of an international border with no customs union and no border checks? It's a fantasy.
Good question. Say to the right honourable gentleman that the opposition need to stop thinking in this binary fashion that either you're in a customs union or you can't have suitable customs arrangements. This is exactly the problem. We have set out very clearly the options that are available. I have elaborated on another aspect of the relationship, notably the regulatory standards. These two go together in building that trade relationship, which means no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
O'Neill.
May I congratulate the Prime Minister on the pragmatic tone of her statement and her speech, which fits the natural tenor of our party as well as our country. Can I also congratulate her upon the recognition of the importance of civil judicial cooperation in this matter, but will she also accept, consistent with the findings of the Justice Committee in the last Parliament, that the Lugano Convention arrangements are not sufficient a basis upon which we should seek to go forward, as they are both more costly and slower than the existing procedures, and that we need something better than that?
Yeah, can I say to my honourable friend, we will be looking very closely at the arrangements we want to put in place in relation to civil judicial cooperation. I think what is interesting about the Lugano Convention is that it shows the European Union is willing to enter into arrangements with other countries, and that is so there's no reason why we can't do that once we've left the European Union.
Heidi Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If continued ease of trade with Europe for our financial services firms, broadcasters, insurance providers, IT companies ends up being dependent upon an EU immigration regime broadly similar to that which we've got at the moment, what will the Prime Minister choose? The economy or her precious immigration targets?
When the British people voted to leave the European Union, one of the issues that they were voting on was the need for this country to take control of its borders, to bring an end to free movement, and we will do exactly that.
Ah, yes, another very well-behaved young fellow, possibly now at the midpoint of his parliamentary career, but I'm sure not beyond. Sir Edward Lee.
Well, thank you for picking this succulent cherry at last, Mr. Speaker. It seems to many of us that the Prime Minister's calm, good sense is moving the country from the sort of gloomy valley of Project Fear, people by the shades of former Prime Ministers, into the hopeful uplands of Project Reality. And what could be more unifying and more conservative than her approach, pragmatic approach, of proceeding by sensible, pragmatic, moderate steps to re-establish the sovereignty of Parliament?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? I think that's absolutely right. Negotiations are taking time. They have been set out, as we know, in Article 50 for those 2 years. What's important is that we approach them with the right, pragmatic, calm approach, but recognising in all of this the optimistic future that lies ahead for the United Kingdom.
On break.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has one chance to pull back from the abyss described in her own impact assessments. So I'd ask her, is she willing to stand up for the majority in this country who do not want the disastrous hard Brexit and give Parliament and the public a meaningful vote to include the option of staying in the EU and to vote for an exit from Brexit? Or will she let herself be dragged down by the inconsequential and deluded men who sit on her front bench and become the third Prime Minister, the third Conservative Prime Minister in history to be brought down by Europe?
There was a time when the Liberal Democrat Party actively wanted a referendum on membership of the European Union. We gave the people a referendum on membership of the European Union. They voted. There will be no second referendum, no exit from Brexit. We are leaving the EU. We are delivering on the vote of the people.
Helen Whately.
Mr. Speaker, rather than seeing our negotiation with the EU through foggy red lenses of a battle between socialism and capitalism, can I thank the Prime Minister for her clear-sighted approach and her commitment to securing an agreement which is good for the whole United Kingdom and will endure the test of time?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, she's raised a very important point that nobody else has referenced, which is that when we come to this agreement, it needs to endure. I think the worst thing would be if we came to an agreement which in a few years' time was beginning to unravel. It's important that this is an agreement, an arrangement and a partnership with the European Union that will, as she says, stand the test of time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister accepted in her Mansion House speech last week that the UK would not be able to trade on the same terms with the EU post-Brexit. Under her government's calculations, how much of a hit will her Brexit be to the UK economy?
Say to the honourable lady that the idea that you can only get a benefit from carrying on working in exactly the same way is, I think, wrong. What we will be doing is having a different partnership, a different relationship with the European Union. Yes, there are some hard choices for us to make. There will be some areas where access will not be the same as it has been in the past. But that does not mean that this is a country whose economy cannot go from strength to strength as a result of getting the right relationship with the EU and trading around the rest of the world.
Andrew Salou.
How can we best ensure that the considerable goodwill which many European Union countries have towards the United Kingdom is fully reflected in the negotiating mandate given to Michel Barnier by the European Union?
My honourable friend, obviously, I saw President Tusk last week to discuss with him the approach that, from the UK's point of view, we think it would be appropriate to see. I hope that we can have a good, open dialogue for these negotiations for the future, and I look forward to being able to... I've set out my proposals for the UK's partnership for the future. We look forward to hearing from the EU what their proposals are.
Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the government tell us what they will do if any or all of our 5 tests are not met?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, we're working to ensure that our 5 tests are met.
Andrew Bridgen.
Mr. Speaker, Canada didn't pay anything for its comprehensive free trade deal with the European Union. Given that we'll be the biggest export market for EU goods when we've left, given that we're offering a very generous divorce package contingent on a deal, does my right honourable friend agree with me that we should be expecting and demanding a much better deal than Canada got?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I'm clear and have said on a number of occasions that I think the relationship that we already have with the European Union is such that we're in a different position from Canada's position. So I think we can have a free trade agreement, an economic partnership that goes well beyond that which the EU negotiated with Canada.
Mr. Stephen Doughty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has admitted that life will be different. Does she now therefore accept the comprehensive analysis of her own government, which many of us have been to see in the Treasury, which shows that the gains from trade will be offset by the losses? There will be a hit to our economy in every scenario that involves leaving a single market and customs union, where borrowing goes up, austerity continues and deregulation comes through. And if not, could she explain to us how on earth this is in the national interest?
I say to the honourable gentleman that the analysis which I think he is talking about didn't actually analyse the sort of arrangement that we're talking about for our future economic partnership.
Ross Thompson.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. In her statement, my right honourable friend reaffirmed her commitment to the UK and strengthen the UK as we leave the European Union. Therefore, does she agree with me that if the Scottish Government is to be true to its word about reaching agreement with her government, that they should immediately drop their plans for a dangerous and unwelcome EU continuity bill, which is driving a sledgehammer to the devolution settlement?
Can I agree with my honourable friend that the continuity bills, I think, are unnecessary? I think what everybody needs to do, and what certainly we are doing as a government, is focusing on ensuring that we get the arrangements, particularly in relation to Clause 11, right, and carry on negotiating to make sure that we get that right for the future.
Leila Moran.
Speaker, staying in Euratom is vital for jobs and groundbreaking scientific research across the UK. Given that the Prime Minister now wants us to stay a member of EU agencies and has accepted a role for the ECJ, will she now listen to those in the industry and that we stay in Euratom?
Reference to the interest that both the UK and the European Union has in us maintaining a close relationship with Euratom for the future. But membership of Euratom is an integral part of membership of the European Union. We are coming out of Euratom as we're coming out of the EU, and as the honourable lady will know, we are putting arrangements in place to ensure that we are able to maintain that close relationship in the future.
Rebecca Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just about to give up. Mr. Speaker, much as I love gardening, Mr. Speaker, I don't grow cherries. But if I did, I'd want to pick them. And if I had a surplus, I'd want to trade them openly and fairly. So, does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need a balance supporting a wider range of sectors than other free trade agreements? And it's in both of our interests, and we must have fair and open competition for everyone.
Well, can I congratulate my honourable friend on her entrepreneurial spirit and say that she's absolutely right. What we want to ensure is that there is fair and free competition. That's why I have referenced binding commitments in relation to state aid and competition, because I think it's important if we're going to have that free trade that we're able to do so on a basis that is truly fairly competitive.
It is nevertheless of great interest to learn about the Honourable Lady's gardening habits, and I feel duly uplifted by that discovery. I simply say to her, never give up. Where's Streeting?
Mr. Speaker, Tony Blair and Sir John Major both warned during the referendum of exactly the scenario facing the Prime Minister now in relation to the Northern Ireland Republic border, which is presumably why a majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the European Union. If everything is as plain sailing as she suggests, why is the Foreign Secretary writing her memos entertaining the prospect of a hard border? And given he's given an undertaking to publish that memo but hasn't found time to do so, perhaps you could prod him or maybe jab him as hard as necessary to get that memo out of him as soon as possible.
Where is it?
Well, no, the answer is that the Foreign Secretary hasn't said that. He is absolutely clear. He's absolutely clear that there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. That is the position of the government. It is what we are working on. We've set out proposals for that, and I look forward to discussing them with the Commission and the Irish Government.
Very discourteous behaviour. Let's have another well-behaved individual. Ah, yes, Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure my family would say that, but could I thank my right honourable friend for two things in particular. One is her absolute upholding of the United Kingdom, our United Kingdom, and our internal trade within our United Kingdom. And secondly, the the point about the frictionless border. In my area of the West Midlands, this is incredibly important. We are manufacturing exporters. We rely on just-in-time deliveries to enable us to export the fine products we do around the world.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that this is a point that has been made to me and others in the government by business, the importance of the integrated supply chains that we now see across the UK and the rest of the European Union, and that's precisely why I put in my speech what I did in relation to regulatory standards. There are many businesses that are clear that in order to maintain those supply chains they need to be able to operate on the same regulatory standards, and why we want to have that frictionless border, and that's why we've made proposals to do just that.
Another very well-behaved person, in fact a cerebral academic, I think, Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Most grateful for the compliments, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said that alignment is possible in two ways, either having the same rules or having the same consequences flowing from different rules. Which of those two categories will the automotive sector fit into, given so many jobs in the country depend on it, not least in my constituency?
It will be clearly up to Parliament to decide which rules apply in the future. What I said in my speech on Friday was that the automotive industry is a very good example of what I've just responded to in relation to my honourable friend's question about those integrated supply chains. And so we've been clear, and the choices will be made as to those areas where it's right, where Parliament will say that actually they want to have an identical law, and those areas where they want to have the same outcome but achieve it in a different means. It is many businesses have been very clear that they want to maintain the same regulatory standards, and that's why that is one of the options that will be available.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, Italy had its general election. The Right Honourable Member for Gainsborough and I met with Luigi Di Maio, the leader of the Five Star Movement, whose party has led in the results today. Over the last 2 years, Mr Di Maio and I have corresponded. He was my guest here in Parliament, and I invited the Foreign Secretary to meet with Mr Di Maio 2 years ago. Given the Prime Minister's commitment to ensure that this country has maximum access to the single market whilst coming out of free movement, which is exactly what Mr Di Maio has suggested Britain should have, will she meet with Mr Di Maio as soon as possible?
Say to my honourable friend that we are, of course, looking with interest at the results of the general election in Italy, and we will, of course, enter into discussions with the Italian government when that government is formed.
Vera Hobhouse.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has struggled today to find any examples of a customs border without physical border checks. And indeed, every expert we have heard in the Brexit Select Committee has said no such thing exists in the world. So how long does she think this new thing in the world will take to agree and implement if she thinks it's possible?
Can I say to the honourable lady that a number of individual honourable members on the opposition benches have making this suggestion that we can only adopt something if somebody else is already doing it. Actually, what we have put forward is a number of proposals for how we can deal with this issue of a customs arrangement, together with the commitments on regulatory standards, that ensure we get that frictionless border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And we stand ready to sit down and discuss those with the Commission and with the Irish Government.
Drew Percy.
Mr. Speaker, last week Siemens announced a £200 million investment which will create 700 jobs in Goole. That proves the value of the economy of the North. So can I ask the Prime Minister, as she negotiates for Brexit, as well as looking out for the interests, obviously, of Northern Ireland, of the City, of Scotland, to look out for the interests of the North? That means approaching this process with flexibility. But it also means standing up for the voters of the North, who voted in huge numbers to leave, and since the referendum have been patronised and insulted as too thick, too northern or too racist.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that the aim is to ensure that we have a result when we leave the European Union that is good for the whole of the United Kingdom. That includes not just Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but the whole of England, including the North. And he's absolutely right. Voters in the north of England voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union. This Parliament gave them that vote. It gave the people of the United Kingdom that vote, and it's right that we as politicians deliver on that, rather than talking like the Liberal Democrats do about a second referendum. The Labour Party won't rule out a second referendum. They should be listening to the people and giving them what they voted for.
Dr. Rupa Huck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First chlorinated beef, chlorinated chicken, then hormone-pumped beef, and now a trade war? Are these really a price worth paying to keep holding hands with Trump? And she should be holding him to account.
I say to the Honourable Lady, we will be, as we are, discussing with the United States of America potential for a trade deal. We'll also be doing that with other countries around the world, such as Australia and others, because what we're doing is ensuring that we're developing the economy of the future for this country that will bring jobs and prosperity to this country in years to come.
Bill Wiggin.
Can my right honourable friend, whilst congratulating her, can she confirm that during the implementation period we will be free to sign international trade agreements?
Yes, that is certainly what we intend to be able to put in place. That is every prospect. We will have the details of the implementation period confirmed fairly soon, but we are clear that we need to be able to sign those trade agreements when we are during that implementation period.
Clive Efford.
Are there any circumstances following the transition period that we would make a financial contribution to the European budget in order for access to any markets?
No. We have, one of the key elements of the first stage of negotiations was the financial settlement. The details of that were set out in the joint report that we published in December. We have said that if we chose to be a member of any agencies, be it on the security front, I've cited, for example, Europol in the past, then of course we would expect to pay some costs of membership of those agencies, but we have agreed that financial settlement with the European Union.
Which side was it? Hugh Merriman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister rightly, in her message to the European Union, says that we have a shared interest with them in getting this right. Does she also agree that the 498 MPs that gave her the mandate to trigger Article 50 have a shared interest in putting the national interest first?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. As well as Parliament voting overwhelmingly to give people a referendum, it also voted overwhelmingly to trigger Article 50. And every member of this House should be behind the government in doing what we're doing, which is delivering on that.
Sangham Debonair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assessment has the Prime Minister or her colleague, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, done of mitigating the impact of leaving the customs union on the creative industry, so important for my constituency in Bristol West?
I referred to the creative industries in the speech that I gave. I referred particularly to broadcasting and the arrangements that we want for the future.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I echo the words of my honourable friend from Brigden Gould about voters in the north, but not only in the north, of course, it was our coastal communities that voted even more supportive of Brexit. But memories of the original negotiations of when the fishing industry was sold out linger on, and, which was one of the reasons for the heavy vote. Can my right honourable friend give an absolute assurance that when she speaks about fair allocation of fishing opportunities, that the British fishing industry will always be paramount?
Yes, but can I say to my honourable friend, I'm well aware of the concern that many fishing communities have in relation to the common fisheries policy, and we will be making absolutely sure, as I said in my speech and repeated in my statement, that we will see fairer allocation for the UK fishing industry in future.
David Hanson.
I support the Prime Minister's objectives in relation to Northern Ireland, but given the absence of a customs union, can she give some more detail as to what's going to happen to the hundreds of lorries that go from Dunleary in Ireland to Holyhead each day, from Larne in Northern Ireland to Stranraer in Scotland each day, and from Belfast to Liverpool each day? Because it's still not clear to the businesses running those operations.
And it is precisely because the movement between is not just between Northern Ireland and Ireland, but the movement is between Ireland and other parts of the United Kingdom as well. Precisely because of that, that we believe that what is the right way to approach this is to find a solution in our relationship overall with the European Union. And it's precisely why it was right for me to say that we did not accept the European Commission's proposal, which would have meant a border down the Irish Sea.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend from Cleethorpes has rather stolen my thunder, Mr. Speaker, but can I just press the Prime Minister on this fishing question? Will it be, once we get our fishing waters back, and that's what I understand we're going to do, will it be our sovereign government that decides exactly who, fishes in our waters?
Well, yes, we will be an independent member of the body which negotiates and discusses access to waters, and it will be this government that will be determining what our fisheries policy is.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 24th of January 2017, the Brexit Secretary assured us that we were going to get a comprehensive free trade agreement and a comprehensive customs agreement that would deliver the exact same benefits as we have. It's clear from the Prime Minister's speech last week and a statement today that promise has been broken, unless she's invented some kind of Schrodinger's customs union we can be in and out at the same time. So how should anybody else in the world trust this government to negotiate trade deals in good faith, when this Parliament can't even trust assurances made at a dispatch box by her Secretary of State?
We will be indeed negotiating a comprehensive free trade agreement. That's the economic partnership that I set out in my speech. Within that, we will have a comprehensive customs arrangement that will enable us to continue to trade on as tariff-free and frictionless basis with the European Union as possible.
That woman.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's subtle and detailed approach to Brexit that she laid out in her speech. I wonder, though, if she, as she well knows, it was the issue of immigration that was crucial in a seat such as mine. Can she remind the House that as we leave the European Union, as freedom of movement ends, it will fall to this House to draw up our immigration policy in the future?
I can absolutely confirm to my honourable friend that it will be for Parliament to decide what our immigration policy is for future.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Vauxhall Motors in my constituency is currently fighting for survival, so we desperately need future training arrangements in the automotive sector to be no less favourable than they are now. Can the Prime Minister give a guarantee of that today?
I have set out very clearly in my speech that I gave on Friday why it is that we believe that in goods, because I separated out goods trade from other areas of trade with the European Union, that I've set out how we can ensure that we maintain those integrated supply chains that are so important to industries like the automotive industry currently.
Ruth Cadbury.
Speaker, in the Financial Times today, we read that the United States is offering Britain a worse open skies deal than we have in the EU as a member. So is this not a precursor for the hundreds of deals that the UK is now going to have to negotiate once we leave the EU?
No, we are discussing with a number of countries around the world how we can improve our trade arrangements with them even before we've left the European Union and get into the position of having a free trade agreement with those countries.
Jonathan Edwards.
Mr. Speaker, following her speech on Friday, the Prime Minister was asked by a journalist, is Brexit worth it? And she failed to give a direct answer. Will she answer today? Is Brexit worth it, yes or no?
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister finds herself between a rock and a hard place, or perhaps between two brick walls. When she's talking about the government analysis that she doesn't agree with any of the three trade scenarios that have been put forward, but she plans that there will be a bespoke deal that will not be any of these scenarios, does she expect GDP to be hit or to increase in her bespoke scenario, and by how much?
Well, can I say, we have said all along that we were looking for a bespoke trade deal with the European Union. We have said all along that that would be something that would recognise the integrated nature of the UK's markets with the European Union's markets at the moment, but also that we will be able to continue to trade around the rest of the world. And as regards growth, I'm very pleased to say that in recent figures we've actually seen growth up.
Daniel Zeichner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the Prime Minister has actually acknowledged there will be costs to this process, but most people, when incurring a cost, ask the reasonable question, how much? Now, the government has made some projections. If we could randomly say a 4.8% cut to GDP, could she explain how much that would mean for every man, woman and child in this country?
As I said in answer to one of the honourable gentleman's honourable friends earlier, the analysis that was set out did not include an analysis of the sort of trade deal that we're looking to negotiate with the European Union.
Nick Dakin.
I thank the Prime Minister for speaking to
President Trump about his outrageous desire to slap punitive tariffs on UK steel and aluminium. What did he say, and what is she going to do, working with the EU27 both now and in the future, to ensure that such protectionism does not prosper in this world?
I was pleased to have the opportunity to raise the issue with President Trump yesterday. What we will be doing when we are outside the European Union, of course, as members currently with the European Union, we continue to discuss with them what approach is being taken in relation to steel. And once we're outside, we want to continue to be a country that actually promotes free trade, but recognises the overcapacity that there is in steel at the moment. My response is very clear that, as I said at the G20 and as the G20 has actually adopted, it's a multilateral approach that we need to dealing with this issue of overcapacity in steel, and that's what we will continue to promote.
Jill Furness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of the United States President's move to impose tariffs on steel imports and aluminium, will the Prime Minister rethink her strategy for a free trade deal with the US following Brexit? And can she act now to ensure our steel industry is not once more plunged into crisis?
Has taken a number of steps over recent years to help to support the steel industry. As I've said, I've raised the issue with President Trump. We continue to discuss it within the European Union. There is this issue of overcapacity in the steel market around the world. That's why the issue has been raised at the G20. Bringing China into discussions around this is an important element of that. And I continue to believe, I just said to her honourable friend, that the right way to approach this issue is to deal with it on a multilateral basis.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister is really so confident of getting a multi-layered customs type of arrangement, the cherry-pick deal she's looking for, can she explain to the House the purpose of the haulage permits and trailer registration bill?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that that particular bill is, of course, a contingency bill. Members across this House ask us to ensure that we are making contingent arrangements for every scenario, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Martin Whitfield.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. 39 bottles of Scottish whisky are exported abroad every second. As the seconds tick by towards our departure, can the whisky industry look forward to the same benefits, or will they be in a worse position?
I believe that the Scotch whisky industry will be in a better position when we're able to have trade deals with countries around the rest of the world. I was very pleased to take a representative from the Scotch Whisky Association with me recently on my trip to China. That's a huge market that could open up to the Scotch whisky.
Paul Sweeney.
Mr. Speaker, the UK already has some of the most unbalanced regional growth of any country in Europe, and the Prime Minister's own Brexit analysis suggests that any deviation from the benefits of the single market and the customs union will only exacerbate that problem. Does the Prime Minister not agree that that is a deterioration, a dereliction of duty, and that the Prime Minister should undertake to ensure that there is no detriment to the nations and regions of the UK as a result of the exit from the European Union?
Will we ensure that we have an exit from the European Union that works for the whole of the United Kingdom? But this is a government, as I said on the steps of number 10 when I first became PM, we want a country that works for everyone. That means every part of the United Kingdom, and this is a government which, through our industrial strategy and our economic policy, is ensuring that we'll see growth and prosperity in every part of the United Kingdom.
Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said today that no one should doubt our commitment to the entirety of the joint report published in December. With regard to Ireland, paragraph 47 stated both parties have carried out a mapping exercise which shows that the North-South cooperation relies to a significant extent on the common European Union legal and policy framework. Will she commit to publishing that mapping exercise?
We have done a number of pieces of work in relation to the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, which look at the institutions and the structures that currently exist. I've said right at the very beginning of this process, well, right at when I set out my Lancaster House speech, that we will make as and when we're able to talk about the next stage of our negotiations, we will do so. We stand by that report, and I've set out on Friday more detail of the proposals that will meet exactly what was in that report in relation to the border.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can thank the Prime Minister for her statement and commend her for her courage and fortitude as well and standing firm. The Republic of Ireland and the EU have put forward suggestions for a border within the customs union. The people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland have voted to leave the EU and the customs union in March 2019. So can the Prime Minister confirm that should the Republic of Ireland and the EU refuse to make an agreement, it will be them, the EU, and not the UK of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, who will be responsible for hard border controls?
I say to the honourable gentleman that we, of course, are clear that we will ensure that there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. But I think we should approach this by saying that this is something for us to discuss with the European Commission and the Irish Government, because it's in all our interests to ensure that there isn't that hard border. It's also in the interests of the Irish Government to ensure there is no border down the Irish Sea, given the extent of trade between the rest of the United Kingdom and Ireland as well. So I think it's for all of us to work together on this.
Christian Matheson.
Oh, there's more to come yet. Can I, listening to the answers today, can I respectfully suggest to the Prime Minister that a policy of vague sloganising and keeping fingers crossed that everything's going to be all right is simply insufficient? And can I ask the Prime Minister to confirm that no deal that we will get out of the proposed solutions that she is identifying will be more advantageous financially or economically than the position we're in now?
Position, it would be a worse deal than now.
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman, he talks about vagueness and lack of clarity. Last year, we published 14 separate papers setting out the UK government's proposals on a number of aspects of our future relationship and on the withdrawal from the European Union. We have been making the running in setting out proposals through Lancaster House, through the Article 50 letter, through those papers in the summer, through the Florence speech, through the Munich speech, and now through the Mansion House speech, and we wait to hear the response from the European Union. But I'm optimistic that we are going to get a deal that works for the UK, and I'm optimistic about this country because of the actions being taken by this government.
Prime Minister and colleagues, thank you. Order.